Hello, welcome to Culture TV. In this video, we'll look at reflexive verbs, verbs that are famously used to describe your daily routine. Stay tuned. So this is lesson 42 of our online program, Let's Speak Russian. I decided to leave this topic out of the main section on verbs that we looked at earlier on in the course, along with a few other bits and pieces, purely because it would have been just too much for you. So we're going to have a look at reflexive verbs now. So what are they? These are verbs that are used to describe actions performed towards or carried out on oneself. For example, in English, to wash yourself, to shave yourself, to dress yourself, and so on. You can see here that we're using yourself, and this is what identifies the reflexive verb. In other words, what's happening here is the subject of the sentence is also the object of the sentence. So usually in a normal sentence, we have a subject, the thing or person doing the action itself, the verb, and then the object, what the action is being performed on or towards. If we have a reflexive verb, then that denotes that whoever is doing the action is doing it towards themselves. So there is no other different object of the sentence. The object and subject are the same. So in English, as you can see, we're using these reflexive pronouns. Yourself, myself, itself, herself, and so on. In Russian, though, we just change the verb slightly. We're going to have a look at how to do that in just a moment. One thing to note, though, is that in Russian, reflexive verbs are much more common than in English, and very often they'll be used when you don't expect it. That means that maybe in English we're not using a reflexive verb, whilst in Russian we will be. So let's have a look at this in more detail. So let's take the verb to wash in Russian, which is мыть. We conjugate it as follows. I'll start you off. Я мою, I wash. Now if you carry on. Ты моешь, он, она, оно моет, мы моем, вы моете, они моют. Okay, so this is to wash. An example sentence, я мою. And then what if we want to say, I am washing the car? What would we do here? Yes, it would be я мою машину. Why is that? Well, машина on its own, that's in the nominative case. Remember, we're going to have to use the accusative case here. Я мою, and then we have an object. We're washing something. The car is being washed by us. So я мою машину. Remember, in the accusative case, a changes to u. Rewatch the previous lesson if you're still unsure. So that's I wash the car. That's when we, or I, in this case, I'm doing the action on something else. So the subject and object are not the same here. What if I want to say that I'm doing the washing on myself? We're going to have to use a different verb here, and that will be мыться. Мыться. This is to wash oneself. All we've done here is we've added two letters, s, ya, to the infinitive. However, the pronunciation is actually моется, as if there's a letter ts there. So, моется, okay? How would we conjugate this? Well, we do the same as we did with the previous slide for мыть, and then we just add on a few letters. Я моюсь, ты моешься, он, она, оно моется. Again, same idea with the pronunciation here. Мы моемся, вы моетесь, они моются. So the rules are as follows. You add on these endings to the conjugated form of the verb. S, soft sign for first person singular, so I. Then ся for everything apart from вы, which is also s, soft sign. And for the infinitive, we're going to add on ся. Okay? The explanation behind these endings is quite simple. If the preceding letter before the S is a vowel, you will say ся with a soft sign. If it's a consonant, it will be ся. That's quite simply it. So if we take another reflexive verb, for example, меняться, меняться, This means to change. Now, in English, this is not a reflexive verb, and this is what I mean by you might not expect it. Одеваться is to get dressed. Оставаться is to stay. Why are these verbs reflexive though? Well, let's have a look at what they would be without these reflexive endings. On its own, менять means to change or to alter, and this is something. So if we, the subject, for example, are physically getting something else and changing it, so we're changing a different object. I don't know, we could be changing the settings of something. We are doing an action on something else. That is менять. What about if something is changing itself? So not an external agent is coming along and transforming something, altering something. It's doing it by itself. For example, the climate. We always talk about climate change now. We say climate is changing. In Russian, we say that the climate is changing itself. Now, although strictly speaking, there are some human causes of climate change, in fact, the main causes are human, we still say that the climate is changing itself. Because the whole process of climate change is, kind of natural in a way. This is really hard to explain, but you have to understand that there are just some verbs in Russian that are always reflexive for certain meanings. So in English, we would say the sentence, the climate is changing. We only have one noun here. It's the only subject, the climate. In Russian, that means that we're going to have to use a reflexive verb because there's no other object. If the climate was actually performing some kind of change on something else, then we could use менять. But because the change is in relation to the climate itself, then it's меняться. Okay? What about одеваться, to get dressed? Removing the suffix will give us одевать. Одевать. This means to dress someone. If you are physically taking some clothes and putting them on someone else, for example, parents might often dress their children, put clothes on them, that is одевать. Yes? So one person is putting clothes on someone else, two different, the subject and object are different. Одеваться, however, is when you're putting clothes on yourself, not on anyone else, but on yourself. That's why we use a reflexive verb. Lastly, оставаться. Оставаться means to stay. Now the form without the reflexive suffix at the end is slightly different. It is actually оставлять. Оставлять. That means to leave something behind. So you might leave an object behind on a desk. I don't know, you might leave your keys at home or something like that. Оставлять. If we make a slight change in relation to the stem, we will get оставать and then оставаться as the reflexive form. In other words, you're leaving yourself behind. That is quite simply the literal translation of оставаться. Okay, just please be aware that you might often come across reflexive verbs and you'll have to use reflexive verbs when you don't expect it. Okay, let's do a bit more conjugation practice. So how do we conjugate одеваться in the present tense? Pause the video now and then we'll go through it. Я одеваюсь. Ты одеваешься. Он, она, оно одевается. Мы одеваемся. Вы одеваетесь. Они одеваются. What about the verb меняться? But this time we'll have a go at doing it in the past tense. The principle is very similar. We take the stem, so the form of this verb which would be the infinitive if it's not reflexive, менять. We conjugate that in the past tense. That would be менял, меняла, меняло, or меняли. Remember that we have to make the participle agree with the subject. And we just add on again the endings. Я менялся, я менялась if you're feminine. So for masculine, the last letter before the reflexive suffix is an L. That means that we're going to have a ся suffix, я менялся. However, for feminine, it's меняла, so we have a vowel, therefore it's going to be ся. Я менялся, or for feminine, я менялась. Same principle, ты менялся, ты менялась. Он, она, оно менялся, менялась, or менялось. Okay, for neuter. Мы менялись, вы менялись, они менялись. All the same there. Okay, so let's have a look at some example sentences. Когда ты будешь мыться сегодня? Когда ты будешь мыться сегодня? When will you wash yourself? And this tends to mean have a shower today. Ничего не поменялось. Ничего не поменялось. Nothing has changed. First of all, remember that in Russian we use the double negative system. Please get used to that. Nothing hasn't changed equals nothing has changed, okay? We're adding on the prefix по here because we're using the perfective aspect of the verb. Now, поменять is the perfective of менять. So поменять conveys this aspect of completion, something that's done once. So a change that has happened only one time. So you've made one adjustment, one alteration, and that's it. You've completed it. However, менять would be an ongoing change, something repetitive, or a gradual change over time. And finally, он остался на работе. Он остался на работе. He stayed or he stayed behind at work. Okay? We're saying на работе and not на работу because, well, again, it's case here. Here we have a different case that we haven't looked at yet, but this will be very soon. This means that he's at work already. He's not going to work. So if you're on your way to work, that will use the accusative case, and yes, that would be на работу, but because he's already there, we're using a different case. And as I said, we'll look at this very soon. So your homework then is to first of all go over everything we've seen already, practice conjugating the verbs that we've seen in this video, and then take a look at these ones. Could you please translate them and also conjugate them in the present and imperfect tenses? Просыпаться, умываться, переодеваться, and надеяться. One of these verbs is a reflexive verb that you wouldn't expect to be reflexive, okay? The rest are to do with your daily routine. After having learned these verbs, you can then start talking about what you do throughout the day, and maybe you can even include some time as well. If you have any other questions regarding reflexive verbs or anything else in Russian, any requests for topics, please let us know in the comments. Alternatively, you can email us. Please remember that we're still offering one-to-one online tutoring. Again, email us for that if you're interested. You can sign up to our Instagram and Patreon. Links for that are also below. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time. Goodbye.